President Leibowitz, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here for this wonderful occasion. Let me say at the outset that while we're celebrating a major accomplishment this morning, our hearts go out to the victims in Las Vegas. We are deeply saddened by the trauma faced by so many fellow citizens in Nevada today. Please join me in a moment of silence for the victims of that terrible attack. Thank you. Well, this morning's announcement certainly affected our circadian rhythms. We at Brandeis could not be prouder of our two professors, Jeffrey Hall and Michael Rosbash, for this award, which they share with Michael Young at Rockefeller University. Others will speak to Michael as a researcher. I want to say a few things about him as a professor, teacher, and just plain good citizen of Brandeis. I perhaps should begin by noting that in addition to now being a Nobel Laureate, Michael is probably the #1 fan of our basketball team. He's also the kind of Brandeis professor who comes to our open house for newly accepted students and invites them into his lab, where they see for themselves the magic created when tenured professors interact and engage with undergraduates, doctoral students, and postdocs, all in the same space and all working together. To me, Michael represents the essence of what makes Brandeis special and unique: a world-class curiosity, a desire to solve real-world challenges, and creating a community of scientists that brings tenured professors together with students in a highly interactive and rigorous environment. On behalf of so many in the extended Brandeis community, and I should note there have been scores of celebratory messages arriving all morning, I offer my most sincere congratulations to Michael and his colleagues for this great achievement. We will now hear brief comments from Provost Lisa Lynch and two science colleagues who know Michael well, Professor Leslie Griffith and Professor Eve Martyr. Lisa?
Good morning, everyone. And Michael, an especially good morning for you. Well, I want to begin by doing a shout out to something that's not been mentioned thus far. Today is a great day for fruit flies all around the world. Yes, I think. So the next time you swat one of those flies, remember that they could be used for good scientific research. But more seriously, I just want to say I couldn't be more thrilled for our colleagues here at Brandeis, for Michael, for Jeff, and for the entire science faculty here at the university. It's that willingness to think about problems in a different way, for being unconventional in your scientific thought, for taking on challenges, for taking on the frustrations of years, dare I say decades worth of work, to make those kinds of breakthroughs that in today's award, it was acknowledged that the research is going to have impacts on our understanding of Alzheimer's, diabetes, cardiac disease. It's so many different afflictions to our society. So this is a wonderful moment to celebrate scientific knowledge from its most basic components impacting the quality of life around the world. Let me just say, from a personal point of view, one of the things that I really appreciate about Michael is his generosity of spirit. President Leibowitz talked about how Michael is engaged on this campus, but Michael is somebody who's generous to his colleagues. He's generous as a scientist outside of the university. He's generous to his students. He's a wonderful mentor. And he's generous even to those of us who are social scientists in other parts of the university, and always giving us words of advice. Yes, that's called a knowing laughter. But you know what, Michael? It's because you care and you're deeply engaged in this university. And as a provost, I couldn't be happier for that. So without further ado, Leslie Griffith.
Hi, good morning. I'm going to say a couple words about Jeff Hall. So Jeff has actually been a larger-than-life presence in just the Drosophila behavior field. His work on circadian rhythms and courtship is a template for understanding how single genes can actually shape behavior. And the scientific field that he seeded is now comprised of hundreds of labs, probably on 4 continents. For Jeff, there was always a certain romance in the idea that there was a clock, some physical entity that could actually keep our physiological processes tuned to the rhythms of the sun on the planet. How that clock would work was a really daunting problem, and Jeff approached it using classical Drosophila genetics. His partnership with Michael really made them an unbeatable team, because Michael has a very deep understanding of DNA and RNA, and he brought it to bear on the behavioral problem that Jeff had defined genetically. This partnership is also a great illustration of the value of basic science, as Lisa mentioned. The idea that studying the activity rhythms of an insect would have an impact on human health was not something that really many people would have thought about 25, 30 years ago, but it has. Circadian rhythms are fundamental to disease susceptibility, mental health, cognitive capabilities, our responses to medications. All of these things are influenced by circadian rhythms. And it was because of this basic research that we now have a better understanding of human circadian rhythms. And I think this will have a big impact on human health. And just to close up, I would say that we at Brandeis, his colleagues and his friends, were incredibly proud of him. It was about time.
Well, Lisa and Leslie have said much of what I also would like to say, but from my point of view, I would just like to say that understanding the molecular mechanisms of behavior is one of the holy grails in biology. And I think the work on circadian rhythms that Michael and Jeff and Mike Young did is probably the premier example that I know of in all of biology where we really can understand exactly what the real molecular mechanisms underlying behavior are. And so for me, it really makes it a signal achievement. Now, I've known Michael for 40 years, and he's imaginative, he's creative, he's always thinking about outside the box. He always has interesting new ideas and things to tell us all. And he has a wonderful sense of humor, which many of you know. And I think it's really important that he's been a remarkable source of energy, both to the Brandeis community and to the world at large. And for that, humor and energy, I thank you. And Michael, I'd like to invite you to the podium.
Well, let's see. I will return to Leslie and Eve and my colleagues in just a few moments. So let's see. Where do I begin here? I guess I'll begin with the fact that a phone call at 5:10 this morning destroyed my circadian rhythms by waking me up. And as one text I got this morning from David Anderson, who some of you know, said, I must have atoned really well on Yom Kippur. So I need to thank a long series of people, and I'm going to pool a very large number into a small set by simply saying that I've had a remarkable, and I continue to have a remarkable series of students and postdocs in my lab over the years who have made all of this possible. And it's impossible to name them all at this point. So a second point, more or less in the same vein, is of course to say a word about my colleague and friend Jeff, with whom I partnered for 20 years here. And Jeff is a larger than life figure, exactly as Leslie said, whose humor and wit and whose ability to walk narrowly on the line of social convention and occasionally fall off is and was unparalleled. And I'll be forever grateful for his introducing me to this field. This is, as Lisa mentioned, this is really a testament to fruit flies. It's the first prize wholly for fruit flies since 1995, when Eric Wieschaus and Nusslein Volhart won the Nobel Prize for their work on developmental biology. So in a way, it is really another piece of evidence that the field that T.H. Morgan began more than 100 years ago at Columbia has just revolutionized biology in all kinds of ways. Seymour Benzer, for whom Jeff postdoced at Caltech, who died in 2007 and really deserved a Nobel Prize in 3 areas. He narrowly missed a Nobel Prize discovering the transistor before he switched to biology. Then his work on phage, in phage and the structure of the gene, and finally in beginning the whole field of fruit fly behavior. And so we really do stand on the shoulders of giants. So I want to make 3 perhaps quasi-philosophical points. And first of all, to say that this is a little bit about, this is means and ends, right? But scientists really like to do experiments. And as I think I steal a quote from the former New York Times book critic, Michiko Kakutani, who said, life is a series of anecdotes and the narrative is written later. And that's really true about science. Science is a series of experiments or observations, and we write the narrative afterwards. And I'm always reminded of this joke about a Frenchman, an Englishman, and a scientist who were discussing whether it's better to have a wife or a mistress. And this will not relax Ron. This is not going to. And the Englishman said a wife is better because dinner's on the table at the right time, and the garden is well kept, and laundry is done, and so forth. And the Frenchman said, no, a mistress is better because it's furtive and it's romantic, and it has all of the excitement of a mystery and an adventure. And the scientist said, no, you need them both, because after dinner you can tell your wife you're with your mistress, and you can tell your mistress you're with your wife, and you can go back to the lab. And so it's really the means and it's the experiments, and you're very fortunate when things come out well. Secondly, I want to say a word about great institutions. So I owe my career to the NIH, to the, as Elizabeth Warren would say, to the social contract, which underlies everything in this country, without which nothing would get done, no one would get wealthy, and no scientist would be able to put one foot in front of the other in the laboratory. And of course, those great institutions include Brandeis, which is a remarkable jewel, which is why I've been here for 43 years and never moved. I love the school. It's really allowed me to collaborate with other people. My colleagues, we have a very female heavy department, and the men in the department are all the better for their influence, both their intellectual presence and their human presence. I love them dearly. And lastly, let me say that I'm eternally grateful to my family, who have put up with no end of nonsense, including my children when they were little, having to continuously say, Dad, I'm talking to you, Dad, when you're lost in the clouds thinking about your experiments. And my wife, there's a sort of famous anecdote in our family when I was grumbling about somebody who had gotten wealthy and inherited the money. And I said, well, he didn't earn it. And she turned to me and said, you didn't earn your intelligence either. So we are all the beneficiaries of good fortune. And that's why I'm standing here and why all of us have had such a great time at this wonderful institution. And so I think I won't say anything about science. Perhaps 2 words, just in case it stimulates. There are going to be questions, I guess. And it may stimulate conversation. I think circadian rhythms was largely a province, a subset of neuroscience when I entered the field. And people were thinking about this in the context of neuronal firing, events that took place in the millisecond time range. And my training was in nucleic acids and gene expression, and I knew about that these events took place over a time course of hours, if not tens of hours, the half-lives of proteins and nucleic acids. And in a way, that was the sole skill set I brought to the table, which really did have a little bit of influence on how the problem evolved. And so that's the only non-humble thing I will say. Otherwise, I'm stunned by this news and will remain, I hope, your colleague and friend and ne'er-do-well human being for the next decade or so.
We'll take some questions and we'll have a little celebratory
sure.
toast. Let me go. So although only a few of us have a glass of champagne here, I invite all of you to join us in a celebratory toast here to Michael and his colleagues' wonderful accomplishment, and really for, as Lisa said, for all of science, the faculty here at Brandeis as well. So Michael, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for the nomination.
Let me just say, if anyone has any questions, I'm sure Michael would be happy to answer any of them. So please feel free to ask some questions. Michael, will you field the questions?
Thank you. So the Nobel, of course, is for beautiful science, but what do you see as the impact on human health, potentially or already?
So so it's a difficult question to answer, in fact, because unlike many Nobel Prizes, the impact has not really been felt very much yet, because this mechanism has been difficult to attack with small molecules. But I think the reason for imagining promise around the corner is because the clock, the mechanism that we discovered, governs at least half of all gene expression in the human body. And so at least 50% of all messenger RNAs somewhere in the body undergo circadian oscillation. So that suggests, and that's of course why everything from endocrinology, behavior, metabolism, everything falls under the broad umbrella of circadian rhythms. And so that's the reason for imagining that one will be able to tinker and ameliorate many, many different problems, from diabetes and aging. Even cancer is impacted by shift work and good circadian timing. So I think that's coming, but not yet here.
Do you have any advice for underclassmen who would love to follow in your footsteps?
I'm not sure that my footsteps are a path that I would recommend for anyone. And those here who know my trajectory would reinforce that. I think it's the same advice I give. The same advice I'd give my kids. You know, find your star, find something you love, and go for it. That's whatever it is. It's the same, I would say, if you were a baseball player thinking about a profession. You've got to go for what you love, and not look back 30 years or 40 years later and say, I never tried. You got to try.
Professor, can you talk about the collaborative environment at Brandeis, specifically as applies to research?
So let's see how to put this. We have always traditionally been resource poor and human capital rich. And so The place is small. It has very high specific activity, which those of you with scientific training will know what I mean. In other words, what the French call the quality-price ratio is very, very high. And so we have a lot of, we have almost everyone is first rate here, a tremendous cast of characters, and people are friendly, interactive. There's a lot of collaborations. We have, thanks in, I would say in significant part to Eve, we have tremendous support for training of our students and postdocs, and collaboration is the name of the game. And so we get a lot of mileage out of resources. We would like more resources, of course, as would anyone. But it's a fantastic place to work, and I stand on my record. It's really why I'm still here and why I never left. It's a fantastic place. And mechanistically, sort of an interesting question. How then does one explain such a thing? And that's a tough question. But my guess is it's just the quality of the people who then hire and bring in new quality people.
Are there any questions on the phone?